You expect more people this evening?
I think one more person, right? Aliona, that's it?
Yes, I think she's good.
Yeah.
Some time ago, I received an email from Sister Alla telling me the various issues here with this group, and she reminded me of them again here a moment ago. Is that my water? Did you put that there?
That's your one.
I got it. So I came here kind of open-ended on what I was going to present because of the few issues that she brought up: time setting, baptism,
Close of probation.
close of probation on November 9th. Each one of those issues would take more than one Sabbath, one weekend meeting that we're doing. So I have a little bit of rebuke for this group. Of the groups that we interact with around the country, around the world, those groups, from human perspective, are a little bit more engaged than this group, okay? And that's okay. It's not, your arm is not my arm to twist. I'm not twisting anybody to do anything any different. But if the conclusion about November 9th of this year is correct, then you got to get with it. You got to come up to speed. If it's incorrect, then you're just like me and Kathy. We're just spinning our wheels and wasting some time. We're going to wake up to the fact that we've just been spinning our wheels. But if not, the significance of November 9th is serious enough that as one of the groups that we consider that we interact with on a regular basis, you guys are lagging behind, okay? And I'm saying this the most friendly way. I don't want to alienate the audience right off the start. But you're going to have to get with it, because I get input on this message from all over the world from people that are studying it, and it's difficult for me to keep on top of it. And I have a fairly good aptitude on prophecy. So what I'm saying is it's becoming mandatory that you keep up with the advancing light of this message, or you're going to find yourself challenged with question marks about whether you really can accept some of the conclusions that are being drawn at this time. Of those three things that you mentioned in this movement around the world now, there are other issues that you didn't mention that you may not be aware of that need to be addressed as well. And I'll tell you what one of them currently is. Before we decide which direction we're going, is that the Lord gave me light on Daniel 11:40-45 a long time ago, and I say me not in a self-exalting way, but I'll be the one that is responsible for seeing this light come to its surface in 1989. That's when we started studying these things. And pretty much I was the main voice teaching any of it for the next, till 2001. I began teaching it publicly probably 1994. So 7 years out there doing it mainly by ourselves. There were some other people along the way that have fallen by the wayside or weren't publicly involved. But since 2001, then there's a change. There's people all over the world in this movement now. So as we've understood the development of this message being the final message, the message of the 144,000, our point of reference for this is our past Reform histories. And in the past Reform histories, there's a principle that we've used from the very beginning. I think one time I brought here the Time of the End magazine and also the Prophetic Lines magazine to show you where it all started. And in those prophetic lines, that was the first thing we ever published. The first time I ever taught anything publicly, that was the notes that I used, that particular book. And in that book, it had a passage from Early Writings, page 259 to 261, it's just been in this message for years and years and years, and it's the one that's from the very beginning. It's the one that says, those that would not receive the message of John the Baptist could not be benefited by the teaching of Jesus. And then in the next paragraph, she goes in and says, those that would not receive the first angel's message in the Millerite history could not be benefited by the second angel's message. So right from the start, we were learning things about the first and second angel's message, third angel's message. But I'm talking about first and second here, that they were testing messages, that you have to accept this one to even be involved in the second one. But as that subject developed further, we realized that in Millerite history, William Miller's the symbol of the first angel's message, but in the time of Christ, the symbol of the first angel's message was John the Baptist. The symbol of the second angel's message was Christ. But John the Baptist, according to Christ, was Elijah. So if you go to the history of Elijah, you find that Elijah typifies John the Baptist. Elisha typifies Christ in that history. And so bringing that down to our day and age, one of the things that's confronting this movement right now is that I've understood a prophetic model. That's what I've taught. Everything that I've presented has been based upon this model, this particular model. But here in the not so recent past, and it's worth noting that the very first time that I spoke publicly, which was at Hope International, with that particular timeline notebook that I just referred to, the very first time I spoke at a camp meeting, there was a guy in the audience that I only met. He says we met. I don't really remember it. He remembers it. And then we never met again for several years, and that was Parminder Bayant. He happened to be working in Seattle during that time period, which is close to where Hope International was, and he happened to go to that camp meeting and actually heard the very first public presentations of this message, probably in 1994 or 1995, somewhere in that time frame. We don't get to know him personally for years later, but the point is that I'm recognizing, even if everyone else can't recognize this, is not seeing it, that Parminder is part two of this movement or this message, however you want to express it. And one of the things that's challenging this message now is that Parminder has a different prophetic model than I've been led to understand. And this is challenging people because now around the world there are people that would, it's like this sister here, and I don't know if you gave me your name. Rosalind, when she met me here at this meeting, this happens all the time. She says, I've been watching you on YouTube or something. Okay, there's people that around the world, they know this message from the influence of Future for America or myself. Okay, so there's people that, I have people tell me, I listen to all the speakers, but the main person I listen to is you. For whatever reason, the Lord led them that direction. But now there's probably more people now that follow Parminder's teachings, okay? Which is okay with me. It isn't any kind of competition that's going on. But over the past 4 or 5 months, people that I have a certain amount of confidence in their aptitude, they've been coming to me, people that are friendly to both myself and Parminder, and they're saying, hey, you two you're teaching a different model than one another. And sometimes I would hear Parminder teach something, and I think, well, I know he's not saying it the way I would say it. And I'll go up to him afterwards, and I challenge him, are you saying this, this, this? And when he explains it, we're on the same page. We're always on the same page. But the reason that I talked about the disciples is the people that have been under the influence of Future for America, I'm going to say it that way, once they begin to see that Parminder is teaching a different model, then they begin to worry about, is this some kind of heresy or some kind of coup that's happening, that this movement's being taken over by some outside influence. And so that issue, which I don't intend to address here, is one of the issues just as much right now as time setting or November 9th or baptism. So you may as well be alerted to that. I'll give you the simple answer for it, is that the prophetic model, the point of reference that I've used as I've taught prophecy, is Daniel 11, verse 40. And Daniel 11, verse 40, begins at the time of the end, 1798, I'm sorry, 1798. And it goes to the Sunday law in the USA. This is verse 40. Does everyone understand what I mean? Because the Sunday law in the United States is verse 41. Okay? So when Daniel 11 verse 40 says, and at the time of the end, and in Great Controversy 356, Sister White says the time of the end is 1798. Then verse 40 begins in 1798, the time of the end. And when you get to the Sunday law in the United States, now you're in verse 41. So the message I was given has to do with this history. Okay, this history. So there are, according to William Miller's rules, which those that are giving the third angel's message will be using the same rules of William Miller, symbols can have more than one meaning. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a couple brief examples, not a lot. I will teach, I can defend, I know that it's accurate, that the judgment of the living begin at 9/11. But Parminder is going to teach you that the judgment of the living begins at the Sunday law. Okay?
So that's confusing.
It's confusing. It wasn't by plan, it was by design. People began to see these discrepancies, apparent discrepancies between he and I, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. Parminder knows exactly how to teach that the judgment of the living begins at 9/11, as I do. He's not ignorant of that. He understands that. That's why when I would confront him over that, are you saying it don't begin at 9/11? No, it begins at 9/11. That's not what I'm saying. But what he was given is not verse 40. My prophetic model, I'm telling you, what the Lord opened up to me, and I never realized it here till the past 6 weeks probably, that what he opened up to me was this history, and what he's opened up to Parminder is the history all the way to the second coming, which I would say is the history of verses 40 to 45. Okay? And this is why when Parminder's going to be upholding his applications, he goes to Great Controversy, chapter 38, 39, and onward. He goes to those chapters that lead to the close of human probation and the second coming of Christ. That's his point of reference. So his model isn't focusing just on this history, it's focusing on this history all the way to the second coming. So there are symbols that I have applied in this history correctly that he applies over here correctly. And we did not see that until people started struggling with it, and people are still struggling with it. They don't even realize that we have the answer resolved at this point. And what I'm telling you here is that this is governed under the issue of Elisha, John the Baptist, Christ. Okay, you have two primary messengers in each of these histories, but they have a different message. They have a different work. Okay, so this history that I'm teaching, it's very significant history. Okay, number one, I'm going to give you 3 witnesses why it's significant. Number one, this is verse 40. You can see this conceptually. It begins at the time of the end in 1798, goes to Sunday law. So number 2 is, this is the history of the 6th kingdom of Bible prophecy. This is the history of the United States. Okay, that's not a coincidence. The United States begins as the 6th kingdom of Bible prophecy in 1798. And right here, it's overthrown by the papacy and the 7th kingdom of Bible prophecy begins. Okay, so right here, you have the history of Adventism. And I know that Adventism goes beyond the Sunday law. But 1798, the time of the end in the Millerite history, that's what the Lord is doing. He's working a reform movement to bring into history modern Israel, and modern Israel is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But as you come to the end here in our history, you're going to have another reform movement, which is the reform movement of the 144,000 that is going to take place in this history. By the time you get to here, those Adventists that are faithful to their high calling, they're going to receive the seal of God. They're going to be an ensign. They're going to be lifted up. Now it's a different story. Now it's about the harvest of the world. Okay, this is about Adventism in the USA. It is about the Lord entering into covenant with the last phase of Adventism, as he did with the first phase of Adventism. And him entering into covenant has been illustrated by Abraham. In Abraham, there are 3 chapters in Genesis where the Lord enters into covenant with Abraham. It's chapter 17, I should do it in order, 15, 17, and 22. And we will deal with these. This is going to, I know that I will deal with these 3 chapters. This is Genesis chapter 15, Genesis chapter 17, Genesis chapter 22. I've been dealing with these 3 chapters for quite some time now, and we will deal with those here. But what we will teach here is that Genesis 15 is the first angel's message. Genesis 17 is the second angel's message, and Genesis 22 is the third angel's message. This is like Revelation 14, verses 6 and 7, verse 8, and verse 9 through 11 in Revelation 14. It's also like Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 2, and Daniel chapter 3. Okay, so my point is if you're not familiar with the 3 angels' messages of Revelation 14 being illustrated in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel chapter 2, and Daniel chapter 3, then it will be it'd be more difficult for you to follow my logic that Genesis 15 is the first angel's message, Genesis 17 is the second angel's message, and Genesis 22 is the third angel's message. But it's airtight. We will show you that. So just accept that by faith here at the beginning of this meeting tonight. Tomorrow we'll show that. But in Genesis 15, you have the Lord's entering into covenant for the first time with a peculiar chosen people in the story of Abraham. The Lord's already entered into covenant with mankind, with Adam, and with Noah, but it's a covenant for mankind in general. But when he's going to enter into covenant with Abraham, at that time Abram, it's for a people that he's going to use to witness to the world. And that's what he's going to use 144,000 to do. Okay, so based upon Jesus being the first and the last, then the first time the Lord is entering into covenant with a peculiar chosen people, which would not be Noah and would not be Adam, it would be Abraham, then it's illustrating the last time he will enter into covenant with a chosen peculiar people, the 144,000. So I want to get back to this, so I just want to take a snippet out of here. In Genesis 15, which is the first angel's message, there's a prophecy about God's people, Abraham and his descendants, going into bondage in Egypt. And depending on where you read in the Bible, it has a time element with it, 400 or 430 years. And it has a judgment associated with it. And when you read Genesis 15, you'll see that when it's time for that time prophecy to be fulfilled, the 400 years, the 430 years, that there's 3 judgments that are going to take place. Does anyone know what the 3 judgments, who the people are that the 3 judgments are executed upon?
The oppressors of God's people.
God's people, that's one.
The nation. The oppressor, the nation.
The oppressors, that's Egypt, the nation where they were taken, Genesis 15 says. And what else? So God's people I gave away. They're going to get judged. Weren't they judged at the 10th plague? That was judgment. If they didn't put blood on that doorpost, they were lost. Okay, so they were judged, and then within a few days, Pharaoh's judged in the Red Sea. So the nation where thou servest, he says, now afterwards will I judge the nation where thou servest. So he uses the word judge And he uses the word also. In the previous verse, he's talking about God's people. But who else gets judged in Genesis 15? It's the Amorites. The iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So what I'm saying is that in Genesis 15, in the judgment message of Genesis 15, and the first angel's message is the judgment hour message, so Genesis 15 would have the judgment in it, that one of the truths about Genesis 15 that comes down to the history of the 144,000 is that when Adventism is judged, the nation where Adventism has been is going to be judged as well. And the nation where Adventism was raised up is the United States. So I want you to see that in verse 40, it's not simply the history from 1798 to the Sunday Law. It's not simply the history of Adventism. It's not simply the history of verse 40. And it's not simply the history of the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy, the United States. It's also identifying when the prophecy of Abraham is going to find its perfect fulfillment. Its first fulfillment was in Egypt, when they were delivered from Egypt. Okay, but it's this here, for us, is the deliverance from Egypt by the Lord, bringing the priests and the Levites out of Egypt, in through the Red Sea, so on and so forth.
Who were the Amorites?
The Amorites. Let's go look at that. I intended to spend some time on this tomorrow. I still will, but okay, who's the least familiar with this message in here? Who can I speak to as the one that I really need to take my time to catch up with?
Me.
Is it?
I'll stand.
How long have you been following this message, Brother David?
I started back in 2007.
Oh, okay. Okay, we'll hold you accountable for everything. Just real quickly, before we answer her question about the Amorites, I'm trusting that someone, maybe you're not so familiar with what I'm going to say, but David would be, and everyone else here should be. Okay, and it's that the three angels' message is symbolically represented all over the Scriptures. Okay, in Daniel 12:10 it says, "Many shall be purified and tried and made white. The wise will understand, but the wicked will not understand." So you have three steps in there: purified, made white, and tried. And in John 16:8, the work of the Holy Spirit is to convict of sin, righteousness, and judgment. And in the sanctuary you have the courtyard, the holy place, and the most holy place. So you see these three steps that can be plugged into the three angels' messages. And the first angel's message of Revelation 14 says, "Fear God and give Him glory, for the hour of His judgment is come." So one of the characteristics of the first message is fear. Glory is here. Judgment already up here. In Genesis 15, I'm saying it's the first angel's message. And in verse 1 it says, "And after these things the word of the Lord came unto Abraham in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram." So right off the bat, the first thing that's said about Genesis 15 is "Fear not, Abraham," and that's the first component of the first angel's message. One of the main things about the first angel's message that you identify in Revelation 14, 6, and 7 is that it is a fractal of the entire three angels' message. You're shaking your head to that.
No, because
You know that. Okay, that's good. Okay. The first angel says, "Fear God." That's the first angel's message. "Give Him glory." That's the second. "The hour of His judgment is come." That's a third. So when we go into Daniel chapter 1, We see all three of these in Daniel chapter 1 because Daniel chapter 1 is the first angel's message. Because Daniel feared God and he refused to eat the king's meat, but he was brought into favor with Melzar, so he was tested for 10 days and he glorified God. He was fairer and fatter, and so was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego than all the others. And then at the end of the days, after their 3 years of education, he was brought into Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar judged him, the king of the north. So in Daniel chapter 1, you have all the characteristics that you also have in the first angel's message in verses 6 and 7 of Revelation 14, because one of the characteristics of the first angel's message is it's a fractal of all three. Therefore, in Genesis 15, if my contention is correct, then you should have all three components in Genesis 15 that make up the first angel's message. And we just gave you the first one. Fear God. Okay, verse 1 of Genesis 15. And then Abraham's going to raise a question here in verse 2. It says, and Abram said, and please note, it's tricky to teach this because I want to say Abram when it's supposed to be Abram, but we all know it's Abraham. Okay, but in 15 it's still Abram. Okay. So if I make that mistake, just look over it. Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus? And Abraham said, behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. Now, Abraham is used to raise the subject of this, and the subject he raises after the fear God is about the seed. And if you were to plug in the seed into the writings or the sermons of Jones and Wagner, Jones and Wagner would speak about the everlasting gospel. They would speak about this seed in Genesis 15. And what is the seed that is the promise here? And you said that kind of... Jesus. He's... Galatians 3. Okay? That's the seed. And Jones and Wagner are right, and you're right, my brother, but that isn't the seed that we're talking about here. Okay? Go to keep your finger in Genesis 15, but go to Revelation 12:17, which we all know because we're Seventh-day Adventists. And this is basic Seventh-day Adventism here. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. So who's the woman? The church. Where does this take you? To Genesis where? 3:15. Okay, so I'm not denying that the seed in Genesis 15, the subject that Abram raises, the seed is Christ. But at the end of the world, the seed that Satan is going to attack in order to attack Christ is the remnant people of God. They're the seed at that prophetic level. Okay, so Abraham introduces the subject of the seed in verses 2 and 3. And then in verse 4 of Genesis 15, it says this. This is still about the seed. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, this shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. Who's this that he's talking about? Pardon me? No. This shall not be thine heir. Okay, so he's letting him know that it's going to be a direct descendant. At this point, he doesn't see the promise that it's going to be also a direct descendant of Sarai, but it is. Okay, so this is the subject raised in verses 2, 3, and 4. And in verse 5 it says, now I'm going to claim he's going to switch gears here. And I'm going to say that right here, sin, righteousness, and judgment, that those that are made white in Daniel 12:10, that the righteousness of Christ, the righteousness of the saints, is the white raiment, white righteousness. One of the characteristics of the second angel's message is righteousness. And in verses 5 and 6, Abraham's going to manifest righteousness. Okay, so fear God, and then I want you to see in verses 5 and 6 the righteousness manifested. And it says in verse 5, and he brought him forth abroad and said, look now toward heaven and tell the stars if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Now, I want you to see something about these two verses. They're just kind of a grammatical connection that I want you to see. In verse 5, it says, if thou be able to number them. If you were going to number the stars, if everyone in this room was a star and I had to number them, what would I do? I'd count them. Good, that's the answer I'm looking for, because Abraham's going to be challenged to go count the stars, and in the very next verse, that action is counted unto him as righteousness. Okay? So did he manifest righteousness here? Yes, everybody's afraid of my trick questions, all right? Or it's okay, so I'm wanting you to see at one level that this Genesis 15 is the first angel's message, and therefore it should have all three characteristics in it. The first verse says, fear not, Abraham. And then in verse 5 and 6, Abraham did what he's told. Go out, look at the stars, see if you can count them. And his faithfulness in that simple command is counted to him as righteousness. So what did he do that was righteous?
He believed.
But how did... Okay, there's a difference in the biblical definition of belief than our typical understanding of belief.
He acted on
In the Bible, if you believe, you act upon it. It's manifested in your actions.
He exercises faith.
He exercises faith in what he believes. Okay, but it's not a lip service. He believes in it. So what did he do to exercise that faith? What was he commanded to do in verse 5? Okay, so what are the stars that he's numbering?
The stars of heaven, but it's not, you're saying it's other than, it's not other
No, I'm not.
look now toward heaven.
Yeah.
So is he counting, and he's losing count of them. There's so many.
Okay, is that what he's doing? Okay, go to Genesis 1.
Okay.
Verse 14. Genesis 1:14 says, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. So what are the signs in heaven that we just read in verse 14? Pardon me? Pardon me? Prophetic signs, but they're the stars.
Stars.
Seasons.
Seasons, days, years. What's that?
Count. Numbering.
Did you say calendar?
Yeah.
It's God's calendar.
Right, it's moed. It's the Hebrew word that means
Yes, that's how they first kept time.
The heavens are God's calendar. What was Abraham told to do to manifest righteousness?
Believe the calendar.
Use God's calendar.
He's not too old yet, right?
What do you mean he's not too old? Why would you be too old to use the calendar?
Well, years. He's not the age. No. Okay. Never mind.
Okay. So let me try to explain myself. I'll come back to this over here on this board. What is this?
It's like
It's a time prophecy of Revelation 9.
Yes.
Okay, and who was it that solves this time prophecy of Revelation 9 that is on both these sacred tables? Who is it the Lord uses to open this up to Millerite history? So William Miller first, Josiah Litch fine-tunes it. What did... I haven't given you enough information to answer this question correctly, so it's wrong of me to ask, but I'm going to do so anyway. What did Josiah Litch have to solve in order to come to this conclusion? Lots of things.
The time riddle.
A time riddle? Okay.
Kind of,
Calendar.
yeah, the day for a year.
Day for a year? Calendar. Different calendars.
Calendar.
What different calendars?
Oh, the Julian.
This is the Julian. This is the Julian. And this is a Gregorian date. Okay, so he's dealing with two different calendars. Okay, this is one witness in Millerite history that one of the persons that was used as one of the messengers in Millerite history, his work was based upon numbering the calendars. Okay, so let me see if we can do it this way. It seems as you guys are pretty sharp today.
Wait till tomorrow.
These are all 1844, even if they don't look like. What's this?
Midnight Cry.
Oh, the,
Midnight Cry.
Midway, Midnight Cry, and Great
Close of
Disappointment.
Birthday.
The Disappointment.
Whose work is this?
Samuel's son.
Okay, so this is Litch, and this is Snow, right? What does Samuel Snow have to do to come to this correct conclusion?
Get to the Cariite calendar.
Okay, he's got to do the Cariite calendar. What else?
Fullness of the
He's got to do the Julian calendar and the Gregorian. What else? He's got to grapple with the rabbinical calendar. Okay, so my point is that other than Miller, and Miller is associated with both of these, Litch and Snow both have to grapple with calendars to reach their conclusions that add up to the message of the hour in Millerite history. Therefore, what I'm saying is that when Abraham is told to go number the stars, and Genesis chapter 1 tells us the stars are God's calendar, and then we're told that the Lord counted it as righteousness that Abram went out and did that very thing. Jesus is illustrating the end with the beginning, and in the beginning there is something to do with God's calendar that is part of a work of righteousness. And both of these histories, there's a, you got four calendars here, you got Julian and Gregorian. But in the reality, there is a biblical calendar in both of these histories too, and there's a biblical calendar in our history. By biblical calendar, I'm saying that when the Bible gives us a date, that date is accurate, no matter what a historian or theologian says, and that is the true biblical calendar. And I'm saying that because there's theologians, chronologists that have developed chronologies that are almost good, but they'll have a certain amount of areas, gray areas, where they're not good, where they'll write it off saying, well, you know, when they were recording it in the Bible, maybe they made a mistake here or there. What I'm saying is there's no mistakes in the chronology of the Bible, even though there's a variety of human chronologists that have not obtained the ability to rightly divide that fact, so they downplay it. But nevertheless, what I want you to see here, and not spend a lot of time on this, is that at the beginning of Adventism, there was a work that was accomplished through calendars. Therefore, because Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning, at the end of Adventism, which would also be illustrated in the first reference of a peculiar chosen covenant people as identified in Genesis 15, that the righteousness is manifested by a work that includes counting, numbering the stars, and the stars are God's calendar. You see that logic? Okay, so that's part of what I want you to see here. But if you don't remember what we're doing right now, we're answering the question about who are the Amorites. Okay, in Genesis 15, verse 1, fear not, Abraham, first angel's message. By verses 5 and 6, he's manifested righteousness, second angel's message. So what else should we see in Genesis 15? Judgment. And we're going to see it on 3 counts, I'm saying. God's people, the nation where they were serving, that's Egypt, and the Amorites. So, and let's begin in verse 13 to see the judgment. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and shall afflict them 400 years. And also, that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. So right there grammatically, it just said, I'm going to judge Egypt, right? But it says, and also I'm going to judge Egypt. So what happened in the previous verse? There was a judgment carried on against God's people. In fact, I've already used the example of Passover. If you didn't have the blood on your doorpost, then you just close your probation. But I would also suggest that there's a judgment involved with going into slavery for that long of a period of time. Okay, so God's people were judged in this history. Then this nation where they were taken, verse 14, and also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward they shall come out with great substance, and thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, and thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the fourth generation becomes an important symbol. It just continues to grow in its significance. I'm not dealing with that now, but in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites are not yet full. So when he judges his people and brings them out of Egypt, he's going to judge the United States at the same point in time. He's going to judge Egypt. National apostasy is followed by national ruin. And at that point, the iniquity of the Amorites is full. Okay, so who are the Amorites is the question. And in verse 18, I can read verse 17, but it's not germane to what I'm going to say. And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. In that same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. Now he's going to define that land for us prophetically, if you're willing to see it, and that land is the land of the Amorites. And he says this, count them with me, and the Kenites 1, and the Kenizzites 2, and the Cadmonites 3, and the Hittites 4, and the Perizzites 5, and the Rephims 6, and the Amorites 7, and the Canaanites 8, and the Girgashites 9, and the Jebusites 10. The Amorites are these 10 nations that are the 10 kings of Revelation 17 that we understand to be the globalists, the United Nations. Okay, so when you get to the Sunday law, God's people will have been judged. The United States, national apostasy is followed by national ruin. But it's at the Sunday law, and there are at least 2, maybe 3, but positively 2 quotes that you know, but you may not know them in detail to believe what I say about these paragraphs, but it says it. In both these paragraphs that you'll be familiar with, Sister White references the Sunday law in the United States. And she says, and at that time shall the Protestants of the United States stretch their hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power. They shall reach across the abyss to take the hand of spiritualism under this threefold union. My point is at the Sunday law, Sister White marks the threefold union of the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet. This is where they come together. This is the United States, Catholicism, and the United Nations. And when that happens, the iniquity of the United Nations is full as well. So in Genesis 15, when you get to verse 13 to the end of the chapter, you have judgment marked. Okay, so Genesis 15, first angel's message. Big proof text for that is that the first angel's message is a fractal. Okay, in Revelation 14 and in Daniel chapter 1. Therefore, the fact that it's a fractal in Genesis 15 is big stuff. Let me tell you why it's big stuff if you're not following the significance of that. It has to do with beginning and ending. Where does the Bible begin? Genesis. What does Genesis mean? Beginnings. And Sister White says all the books of the Bible meet and end in the Revelation. So the fact that we're seeing Genesis 15, 17, and 22 as the three angels' messages, well, that's the beginning of the Bible, and the three angels' messages of Revelation 14 is the end of the Bible. Okay, but Sister White also says, in the Revelation, she says this, but she says it structurally different. In the Revelation, the same line of prophecy that's taken up in the book of Daniel, something like that. The same line of prophecy that's taken up in the book of Daniel is taken up in the book of Revelation. How many are familiar with that quote? No one, huh? Okay, she says that. If you type in, and I'm prepared. I got my computer. I don't know how important this is, but it may be important to someone here, so I'll dig it out for you.
Manuscript release 8.
Okay, say it again.
You already got it?
Manuscript release 8.
Chapter 8. Yeah.
Manuscript release,
8 MR, chapter 122. It says,
chapter 122?
Yeah. Shall I read it?
Hold on one second. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It says, I'll read a couple sentences.
You said chapter 122, but you meant page 122.
CH.122. 8 MR CH.122. What is that? Chapter.
Okay, whatever it says.
Yeah, okay. So,
Read it. Yeah, I'm not arguing with you. I'm arguing with your device, all right? Don't get defensive on me.
all right, shall I read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Many ministers make no effort to. Should I give you the context or just read that verse?
Just read it to where it says the same line is taken up as in the book of Daniel. And I'm standing close to you, so you're next to the microphone.
Revelation is a sealed book, but it is also an open book. It records marvelous events that are to take place in the last days of this earth's history. The teachings of this book are definite, not mystical and unintelligible. In it, the same line of prophecy is taken up as in Daniel.
That's it. So, that isn't the only place. She says they're the same book. She says that they bring each other to perfection. She doesn't use the word perfection. She uses another word that means perfection. Pardon me?
Completion.
Complement. Complement with an E, not an I. So my point is this. Revelation 14, 6 through 11 is the three angels' messages, and in Revelation 14, the first angel's message is a fractal of all three. And we've seen this same characteristic in Genesis. I haven't showed you chapter 17 and chapter 22 to prove all of it, but you've at least seen the logic of why I'm saying Genesis 15 is the first angel's message, and you've seen the fractal in it. And I'm saying that this should be expected because Genesis is the beginning of the Bible and Revelation is the end of the Bible. But I'm saying the reason that we should expect to see it in the book of Daniel is because we're told that the same line of prophecy that's in the book of Revelation is in the book of Daniel. Okay, and we're told it's the same book. They bring each other to perfection. And in Daniel chapter 1, you have all the characteristics of the first angel's message. Daniel chapter 2 is the image test, visual test. Second is usually a visual test, some kind of visual test. Daniel chapter 3 with the image on the plain of Dura, Sister White repeatedly says, is the Sunday law. And the third angel's message is a warning about the Sunday law. So there is a prophetic logic that you can see the three angels' messages in Daniel, and a prophetic logic that you can see it in Genesis, because Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. And so the Amorites being judged takes place right here, as well as God's people being judged and the United States being judged. The way that, just to get back to one of my first points, the light that was given, the light that I recognize that I've been teaching since 1989, that's when we began teaching, until now, is the light of the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy. And I'm arguing that the light that Parminder has been given is the light of the seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy. And it does not contradict anything that I'm saying, but there are symbols in this history that I use that are airtight, they're valid, and they work in this model, but he will use those very same symbols over here in verses 40 to 45 to draw different points. And because of human beings being what they are, he and I, every time that we interact, we have no problems. No problems. And I have people close to me, you know, that have watched him say things that they thought he was contradicting with me. So this isn't just people out in the community that I don't know. And sometimes I've went to him purposely saying, are you saying this? No, I'm saying this. We're on the same page. Okay, we're on the same page. Okay, so a couple weekends ago, I think, yeah, a couple weekends ago in California, I did this presentation I'm doing right now in more detail. And I won't go any further with this presentation here this weekend. I might refer back to it. But the reason that I brought this subject up is because I was told that there are people here that are struggling over November 9th, over time setting, and over baptism. And I just want to be clear, you need to catch up. But there's also another thing that everyone's struggling with. And that is, why does it sound like Parminder's teaching a different message than Jeff is? And I just want to, you may not even been aware of that being an issue yet. Now you're aware that it is an issue, and you've got at least how I'm working through that issue for myself firsthand. Parminder and I, when we interact, we're on the same page. Secondhand, I think it's airtight that the light that was opened up in 1989 is the light of verse 40. It's a really important light, okay? But none of us in this room have ever lived in a history that was not the history of Daniel 11, verse 40. This is the history we're living in. It's present truth. But when you get to the Sunday law, that's verse 41. Now you have a whole different issues, okay, to solve. So, did I answer the Amorites? Any other questions before we move away from that?
So the judgment of the living does start at 9/11, and then it continues on after Sunday law, after the Sunday law.
Yeah, the judgment of the living begins at 9/11.
Right.
Okay, and it's going to go until the last case is decided and Michael stands up and human probation closes. But for the message that I have understood, which is the message of Adventism, the judgment of the living begins at 9/11, and by the time you get to the Sunday law, the judgment of the living for Adventism in the United States at least, it's all over. Okay, it's all over. But this is where the judgment of the living is going to begin for the Nethinims, the 11th hour workers, 1 hour laborers, whatever you want to call, however you want to define them. Okay, so if you've followed any of Parminder's presentations, then you've probably heard him dealing with chapter 38 and onward in Great Controversy. And that's where When you're in chapter 38, you're down in this history over here, okay? But great controversy is accurate, okay? But it's telling the history of the seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy, if you understand what I mean, not the sixth. Okay, so that's another controversy that this movement is dealing with at this time. I'm going to do, I intend to teach at our school in March. Right now, Tabo's there teaching till the end of this month. And then in March, I'm going to teach the next month, and then we have a camp meeting at the beginning of April. And when I go back, it's my intention, when I'm going to teach in the class, is going to be based upon a, what would you call this? A concept, okay? My point of reference for the presentations is a concept, and the concept I get from William Miller. And William Miller reached a point in his life after 1844 where he's going to write a document. Does anyone, you couldn't really know, well you could know, some people would know. Does anybody know what the name of that paper is? Because that's going to be my point of reference. I'm going to rob it. I'm going to plagiarize William Miller's title. It's called William Miller's Apology and Defense. Okay, because I'm going to explain why I used to teach the time setting wasn't valid. And I'm going to make the case of why I understood it wasn't valid, but why it's different now. So I'm going to make an apology for teaching time setting when I used to oppose it, but I'm going to make the defense about why it's valid. Okay, so I'm going to do that not just with time setting, but with November 9th, with this kind of material. Because that's what Miller did. Miller went through, he realized that his prediction didn't come to pass on October 22nd, 1844. And he goes through the apology, but he explains how he got there, and he basically says, if I had to do it all over again, I'd do everything just the same way I did it going through, okay? That will be my point of reference in these studies, and I'm going to try to show in a more detailed fashion than we have here this Sabbath. I know we got Sunday morning, but it's basically a Sabbath, to deal with these issues. So I'll start here. We're done with this. I'm going to change gears. I'm going to start here telling you about where this movement started setting time, but didn't know it. Okay, does anyone know where that is? 2520, why? You've been watching stuff on the web. I might have to silence him with answers. I could tell. Oh, tell me why.
Because it was forecasting.
Okay, that's a good way to say it, I guess. Does everyone know what he means?
It's going beyond 1844.
Okay, so maybe we're all up to speed on this. I can take this off, right? This isn't... We didn't know that we were time setting. And now that we do know it, go ahead.
Do you think that's one of the big problems that get people wrapping their minds around the 2520? That it seems to be time set?
I don't think anybody knows that it's time setting.
And there may have been a few people that, when the point that I'm going to go to, that my brother's probably referring to, when that particular study came to the surface, there may have been people that saw it and said that's time setting. Seems to me like there was maybe a few voices. But they were such a minority that no one paid attention to them back then because the information was too complete and too thorough. But that was a phenomenon in the Millerite history too. Even though they were wrong about 1843, the Lord prevented the opponents of the Millerites from recognizing any way to prove that they were wrong. Okay, so I'm not saying we're wrong about time setting, but I'm saying the Lord may have held his hand over this because the element of time is a test. Okay, so this is an easy one for all of us. So what is this?
46 years of...
The starting point for 2520.
Starting point for 2520, but where are you going to get this from in the Bible? Isaiah 7. Okay, there's a prophecy of 65 years in Isaiah 7. And how did we come across? We knew about that prophecy. Let's go to Isaiah 7. It's in verse 8 that you find the prophecy. It says, "For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and in 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it shall not be a people." 65 years is 65 years. And when the chronologists mark biblical history, the best history is where you have more than one king, more than one historical figure that allows you to use the historical evidence to mark the date. And if you go back to verse 1 of chapter 7, it says, "And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up towards Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it." Verse 1 of Isaiah 7 has 3 kings in it. A northern and southern king from Israel, and the king of Syria. Therefore, the Bible chronologists will tell you that the date for the writing of Isaiah 7 is one of the soundest dates in the Bible. It was 742 BC. They have 3 different kings with historical events associated with those kings that make this one of the strongest dates there are. So in verse 8 it says, "Within 65 years shall Ephraim, the northern kingdom, be broken." And in 723, the northern kingdom is carried into captivity. And at the end of the 65 years, even though it doesn't specifically say anything about it, this is where the southern kingdom, where their problems begin with the captivity of Manasseh in 677. And what was Manasseh? He's an earnest of what was to come. Yeah, he's the king of Judah. He's an earnest. There's going to be Manasseh, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kings. This is the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Zedekiah right there at number 7. But Manasseh is an earnest. Sister White says that. What's an earnest? Down payment. And Manasseh was carried into Babylon, but he was allowed to come out of Babylon, right? So if Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning, and he's the down payment, the first, what's it saying about Israel here, Judah? They're going to go into Babylon. They're going to come out. Okay, there's a lot of things to derive from here. But over here, what we came to understand is this 2520 takes us to where? 1798. And what is 1798 in terms of a prophetic symbol? Time of the end. And this 2520 is going to take us to where?
1844.
And how many... Everyone knows when the first angel's message was in, I don't know if everyone knows, but in this study environment, typically everyone knows that when the first angel's message is empowered in Revelation 10, that the angel that comes down has what in his hand? And what's John supposed to do? Take and eat it, okay? And you may, and everyone in this room probably knows that was the first angel's message. But Sister White in early writings, when she talks about the second angel message, the second angel arriving, what does he have in his hand?
A roll?
A scroll.
A scroll, yeah.
And when the third angel arrives, what does he have in his hand? That's also in early writings. He has writings. Writings in his hands. Writings, scroll, the little book. First, second, third angel's message. if the one with the little book in Revelation 10, John's supposed to take and eat it, then you're supposed to take it and eat it every time an angel arrives.
Right.
Yes? Okay, so here, October 22nd, 1844, the third angel arrives. Is this true? In early writings, Sister White says so. In the book Early Writings, she says that plainly. And when he arrives, he has the writings in his hands. Okay, so this is where we got into time setting. Now, I'm going to explain why, but you have to see this. I'm going to go over this board for a second. In 2005, there was a passage from the Pioneer Writings that was discovered that was provocative, and it was provocative because it was Hiram Edson. And who was Hiram Edson? No, but who was Hiram Edson? He's a pioneer. What's his primary claim to fame?
He saw the vision.
She saw the vision, okay? Let me ask you another question and come back to that if I can remember to come back to it. When the Lord held his hand over a mistake in, how'd she say it, a mistake in the figures on this chart, it was a singular mistake, plural figures. I always put my hand up here. Is that correct?
Yeah, because both of those 43 and 44.
Well, yes, 1843 is the issue.
26.
Okay, let's be sure that it is correct. I'm not, when Sister White says the Lord held his hand over a mistake in some of the figures until his hand was removed, it's a singular mistake, it's figures in the plural, and when you work through the history to determine what time prophecies were impacted by that mistake, it's just these two. Okay, the 1335 is correct.
Yeah.
Okay, it ends in 1843. Okay, so the only two time prophecies on this chart that were negatively impacted by the fullness of the year mistake are these two.
Yeah.
Okay, so he held his hand over the fullness of the year when they were trying to calculate the 2300 and the 2520, and they came to 1843 as the wrong conclusion. When they corrected the mistake on this chart, then you have 1844 for both the 2300 that begins in 457 and the 2520 that begins in 677. Okay, so I want you to see that these two prophecies are the point of reference in terms of what the Lord's holding his hand over. Okay, so now back to Hiram Edson. What's Hiram Edson's primary claim to fame in Millerite history? And my sister already said it. Okay, right here, Hiram Edson is given light on what? Okay, you can say it that way, but I'm going to say it's 2300. You follow me? Okay, so the Lord chose Hiram Edson, all right? And over here, in 1856, the same guy, Hiram Edson, is going to begin a series of articles on the 2520. It was never finished. It was incomplete. I think there might be 5 or 6, but they never got finished off. And they ended and they went into history until 2005. In 2005, a brother that reads the Pioneers came across this series of articles by Hiram Edson on the 2520. And what does Hiram Edson say in these articles that are called the Times of the Gentiles about Miller? He says Miller was wrong. Miller was wrong. Miller should have, when he did the 2520, he shouldn't have used the 677 that begins this 2520, he should have used the 2520 against the northern kingdom. This is what Edson is arguing. That Miller made a mistake. And why is Edson's argument so strong? It's so strong for this reason. Not that Gerhard Damsteed is perfect in everything, but Gerhard Damsteed is a professor, maybe not anymore, he might be retired, at Andrews University, and when he did his course on Millerite history, he wrote a book on Millerite history, and we use his book and sell his book to deal with Millerite history. And on page 11 or 22, and I don't know why, I never can remember whether it's page 11 or 22, but it's either page 11 or 22 in the Foundations of Seventh-day Adventist Message and Mission by Gerhard Damsteed. You'll find up on the top of the page, which is on the left side, he identifies the two major points of William Miller's prophetic understanding. And what are the two major points of William Miller's prophetic understanding? He saw all prophecy. No, he saw all prophecy was identifying two desolating powers. A desolating power outside the church, which was paganism, and a desolating power inside the church, which was papalism. And every Millerite, that was their model. When they're looking at prophecy, they're understanding that the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation are structured by telling the history of pagan Rome and papal Rome, above and beyond any other history. Okay? So that's Millerite, that's the Millerite logic. And so when Hiram Edson is saying William Miller's wrong, what's his argument? He says if Miller would have took the 2520 against the northern kingdom, then if you take it to the dead center, it's 538, and you produce 1260 years of pagan Rome trampling down the sanctuary and the host, followed by 1260 years of papal Rome trampling down the sanctuary of the host. So Hiram Edson, he's using the strongest Millerite logic you can to say, I think Miller should have used this 2520, not this one. Okay, and it's strong logic. But he never finishes the articles. He never finishes them. So in 2005, the reason we get excited, I said it was provocative, is because in that time we're still getting a lot of negative feedback from people that say that verse 41, the glorious land, the Adventist Church teaches that the glorious land in verse 41 is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And they're wrong. It's the United States of America. But we have this controversy going back and forth for years. Okay, it's like time setting is now, or baptism, or any of these other issues. Back then, this was an issue. And in these articles by Hiram Edson, he reaches the point as he's giving his explanation where he identifies the United States as the glorious land. So when we found a pioneer that was agreeing with us that the United States is the glorious land of Daniel 11 verse 41, that was really cool. You could wrap your mind around that article and go say, look at, a pioneer believes like we do, but not simply a pioneer. It's the pioneer that had a vision to explain the great disappointment. An important pioneer. Important enough that James and Ellen White named one of their sons after him. Okay? Edson White is named after Hiram Edson. So it was cool when we found that. And within 2 Sabbaths, and this is something, it doesn't matter, I'm not trying to talk about me, but it's a fact. When I go present prophecy, it's almost never, but it's very rare, where I don't have more material than I can get through. I always have too much material. And I was in Southern California, in a church in Colton area, which is just it's a church of just frustrated Adventists that get there. They don't go to the Adventist church anymore. There's always a couple hundred people in that church, big church. And probably about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the summertime, where you got lots of light left, I said, well, I'm done with my material. And should we end it and part ways? They said, no, let's keep studying. So because they did that, I said, well, okay. I just learned something. I don't know anything about it, but I'll go ahead and share it. Okay? And so I'm positive, but if the Lord wants to correct me on this, he can correct me, but I don't expect him to. what I did was I taught what I learned from higher ed medicine, but I hadn't settled in. This is only 2 weeks at the most after we read those articles. I hadn't settled in whether higher ed medicine was accurate or not. Was Miller wrong? Or was Miller right? Or were they, I just hadn't settled in, so I just figured, oh, well, I'll just teach it the way I understand it. And the way I taught it was, there's a 25-20 against the Northern Kingdom that begins in 723 and ends in 1798. And I put in the details about 538 and that I just put over here. And I put this here, 677, those are sevens, to 1844. And the first time that this was presented since 1856 was in 2005, and in 2005, when it was presented from the perspective that both of these were correct, and we've never backed away from it. Because when we began, afterwards, as we began to study it, it just got confirmed they were both correct. And for whatever reason, maybe I hadn't settled into it one way or another on that day. I would just put them both up there right from the very beginning because I remembered them. And that's how it started. So my point is, here's my point. The Millerites. I've got to throw this point in too. If you've read any of the writings of the Millerites, you have to realize, I think you have to realize, but you don't have to realize. You have to realize those people were so much smarter than we are. Oh, when it comes to their biblical aptitude and their spiritual aptitude, they were so much beyond us without any devices or computers or bookcases full of books. Electricity.
No iPads, no TV,
Yeah.
no electronics.
He used to read.
What's that? Just light?
William Miller used to read.
Yeah, well, how do you read?
He lit
With
some kind
pine chips
of- yeah. 'Cause he
at
just
night.
didn't really like.
But in any case, here's my point. If you can buy it, I buy that. They were smarter than us, but they didn't see in 1856 what we seen in 2005. They missed it. So what I want to share with you here is that in 1863, this is where William Miller's jewels begin to get sealed up. This is where a lot of things happen. This is where this chiastic structure comes to a conclusion, because what this chiastic structure does is it puts 19 years here, followed by 46 years here, that produces 46 years here, and therefore there has to be 19 years over here. I know the balance isn't perfect. You can see that, right?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
That's where we start setting time. Because you know that if you have a problem with time setting, that Sister White says, after October 22nd, 1844, no more time setting. Okay, but what I'm arguing with you is, what my argument here is if they would have accepted the light of Edson right here in 56, they would have been able to see these two 25-20s just like we did, and they would have been able to see that something happened in 1863 just like we did. But they didn't. In fact, what did they do in 1863?
Create a new chart.
Yeah, they throw out the 25-20. They create the new chart. They throw out the 25-20, proof that they're beyond their ability to recognize this 25-20. Okay, so we didn't recognize this as time setting post 2005. Time setting, we've only been discussing this for a year and a half. But this is where it started, because as soon as you begin to teach publicly, and the brethren that are listened to and you are accepting your premises, that this date here, 1863, came 19 years after 1844, based upon these two 25-20s, you've just set time in place.
Past 1844.
Past 1844. That's where it started. That's where it started. They may have started somewhere else that I haven't noticed, but I know it started there. Okay? Do you follow the logic that I'm saying?
In other words, it has to come to completion. This chiasm has to be completed to be symmetrical, right?
Yeah, then you have to ask yourself, does the Bible actually use chiasms? And all the theologians inside Adventism, outside of Adventism, will teach you much more thoroughly than I about all the chiastic structures that run through God's Word. It's just, that's the Hebrew way of writing, chiasms. So to make an argument about a prophetic chiasm such as this is in agreement with the theme, well, not the theme, one of the techniques of Bible truth. Okay. Therefore, I apologize if I opened up time setting back in 2005. I didn't know I was doing it back then, but I couldn't do it any different. And over here in 1863, when we get to 1863, at the end of this chiastic structure, we come to understand, among other things, that this is where William Miller's dream begins. And we realize through a process of step-by-step prophetic application that 126 shekels or tekels, in agreement with Daniel chapter 5, symbolizes 2520. 126 shekels is a symbol of the 2520. And we've seen in William Miller's dream that before he weeps, he's going to use the word scatter or some variation of it 7 times. So as Miller's dream starts here with these jewels getting covered up, he's going, if you were an English teacher and William Miller wrote his dream as a grammatic presentation and you turned it into your English teacher, she's going to take some grades off. She's going to say, you use a different word than scatter. You're using scatter, scatter, scatter. You're using it too much. It's not good grammar to do it that way, Bill. That's what she'd say to him, yes.
But I counted them, and I got 8. There were 8 references.
He's taping this. You listen to what I said. I said, before he weeps.
Before we got you.
Okay, so now he brought up a point. If you read William Miller's dream and you're not familiar with it, the reason I said before he weeps is because the word scatter is also in there again. But it's not until after William Miller weeps. Okay, and what did we understand about William Miller weeping? That was typified by John weeping in Revelation chapter 5. When the Lion of the tribe of Judah prevails to open the book that's been sealed with 7 seals, he prevails after John wept much because no man was able to open the book. Okay, so when he begins to open the seals in Revelation 6, the first 4 seals, Jesus would say to John, or the beast would say to John, come and see. And you're going to find in William Miller's dream twice, the dirt brush man is going to say to Miller, come and see. Okay, so what we were seeing was that the book that was sealed with 7 seals in Revelation 5 and onward, that book was God's Word, and that it had been sealed up through the introduction of human teachings and false doctrines that are handed down from generation to generation. Are you familiar with those quotes?
Customs and traditions.
Customs and traditions that are handed down from generation to generation. So we realized that when the book that was sealed with 7 seals in Revelation 5 was sealed up and no one could open it, it's talking about the Bible being sealed up at different points of history. And we could go into there's all kinds of Spirit of Prophecy quotes to back this up. Therefore, when you're in William Miller's dream and you realize that these truths that he's put together and put on a table for everyone to come and see, that the covering up of those truths is accomplished through custom and traditions that are handed down from generation to generation. So we've seen a progressive sealing up of his foundational truths from 1863 to 1989, which is 126 years. And what's 1989 in our history? Okay, it's the time of the end. Okay, now let me show you something. Everyone knows this chiastic structure, right? Yes? Brother David, you know this too, right? When we came to the 126 years between 1863 and 1989, it was in conjunction with Revelation 4 and 5 of Nebuchadnezzar living for 7 years like an animal. Yeah, and in chapter 5, Belshazzar's handwriting on the wall. Okay, and Sister White says that Nebuchadnezzar, what's the word? Typified. Nebuchadnezzar typified Belshazzar. So you had the Spirit of Prophecy quote that tied them both together. And when William Miller taught the 2520, he used Daniel chapter 4 as one of his witnesses that Nebuchadnezzar was living like an animal for 2,520 days. He used that as one of his witnesses. But what we had recognized, because the beginning of Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar, pointing to the end of Babylon with Belshazzar, and Sister White saying that Nebuchadnezzar's judgment typified the judgment of Belshazzar, that Belshazzar's judgment, the handwriting on the wall, was the 2520. And we could calculate it from the expression many, many tekel upharsin, but we also realized that a tekel, although it has two values, I'm only going to address one. A tekel, 126 tekels equates to 2,520 gerahs. So when we saw 1863 to 1989 was 126 years in connection with Miller's dream and Daniel 4 and 5, we were further down the road of time setting than we thought we could get. Okay? So, this would be a little bit the same thing, only a little bit different. A little bit easier, I hope. I'm not going to put the lines. I put the 19 here and the 46 here. But you know what this represents, right? This is 1798. Time of the end. 1844. (1863). William Miller's book is sealed up. Now I know, I don't remember much, but I know in this group that we have taught here, what's the biblical argument to prove that William Miller's jewels, his foundational truths, get sealed up in 1863? What's the biblical argument? Okay, so, all right, let's back it up to more simple Adventism. Daniel chapter 12, the book of Daniel sealed up. Yes? Until when? The time of the end. And when it's opened up at the time of the end, what happens? Knowledge shall be increased. Many shall run to and fro. Okay, was that phenomenon, was it fulfilled in the time of Christ? Was the book of Daniel unsealed in the time of... It was? Daniel 9 was unsealed in the time of Christ?
No, Daniel 8.
Daniel 8 and 9 are the same. Okay, Daniel 8's the prophecy, Daniel 9's the explanation of the prophecy at one level. You're absolutely right. I'm just trying to get you to talk it out a little bit further so everyone's on the same page. Yes, the book of Daniel was sealed up when? In the life of Daniel. It says, seal up thy book.
Yes.
It was unsealed when?
His baptism.
Well, it's got to be, I argue it's unsealed before his baptism. What were Anna and Simeon doing when they see the baby Jesus brought in the temple? They're glorifying God. Why? Because they knew he was coming. Okay, what are the shepherds on the hill doing? They're talking about the Messiah. It's time for the Messiah to be here. What about the wise men of the East? Okay, so the prophecies of Daniel chapter 9, the fact that Christ was going to come, be the Messiah, confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, it was unsealed in the time of Christ. I thought it was unsealed in 1798.
Then it was sealed up again.
How? When? And
34 AD.
34 AD. Okay, so that proves we have discussed this here.
Time of the Gentiles.
Time of the Gentiles. Go to Daniel chapter 9. Verse 24. If you've never heard what we're teaching here, this is a nice little gem. And I know that I've taught this many times, and I have a sense that the people I've taught it to, they never value this little gem. Okay, so this is worth considering. In Daniel 9:24 says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity. What's the 70 weeks? 490-year prophecy beginning in 457 and ending in 34 AD. Is everyone up to speed on that? Okay. And to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to what? Seal up the vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy. So what happened to the book of Daniel at the end of the 70 weeks, and when was the 70 weeks ended? 34 AD. The book, the prophecy, the vision is sealed up. What happened in 34 AD? And lots of things, but I'm going to point to one primary thing in terms of what we're studying. What happened in 34 AD?
Stoning of Stephen.
Close of probation.
Close of probation.
Gospel goes to the world.
That's closer. 34 AD is the arrival in history. Let me say it this way. Is it okay for me to marry another bride before I'm resolved with my bride?
Yes.
He can't marry a new bride before he divorces his old bride.
Yes.
So when is Israel fully divorced? 34 AD. And what does he do in 34 AD? He marries a new bride. And what's the new bride?
Christian church.
It's the beginning of a church, a Christian church. When a church begins, the book of Daniel is sealed up. Did the Christian church begin in earnest in 34 AD?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Did the Seventh-day Adventist Church begin in earnest in 1863? Yes, it did. When a church begins, the book of Daniel is sealed up. Did the book of Daniel get unsealed in Millerite history?
Yes.
In 1798? Do you believe it was unsealed in 1989?
Yeah.
When did it get unsealed? You could say, well, William Miller's Dream talks about it getting, these foundational truths getting covered up, but when did that start? Well, when did they set these two tables aside and introduce the 1863 chart? The very same year that the Seventh-day Adventist Church was started. So when a church is started, the book of Daniel is sealed up. Okay? So that's 1863. That's why I have sealed up here. Okay, so without taking the time to explain all, I haven't explained the logic of 126. We've came to understand that the number 126 is a symbol of the 2520. We've did so very simply because we're saying 126 is 1/10 of 1260. Okay? All right? And if 126 is a 10th of 1260, therefore it is a symbol of the 1260. What is the 1260? It's half of the 2520. So 126 is a symbol of the 2520 prophetic level. I left a lot out of that. But what I want you to see here is that if you can recognize that in 1863, the book of Daniel was sealed up when a church began. When William Miller's truths began to get covered up, what was the first truth that he discovered? The 2520. What's the first truth to get covered up? 2520. Okay, in 1863, you have the 1863 chart. If you go 126 years into the future, where do you come to? Let me think this through. All right, so over here in 1888, if you go to you're at the time of the end, right? If you start in 1888 and you go to 126 years in the future, where do you come to? 2014. And on other studies, it has been demonstrated that in our history, the history of the priests, the third angel arrived in 2014. I want you to see this structure that I'm developing here is identical to this structure. But down here, this 19 years, I'm saying it starts in 1856, when the Lord gives Millerite Adventism the opportunity to follow the advancing light of the 2520 the way they did on the 2300, and in both cases, whether it's 1844 or 1863, the man the Lord chose to open that subject up was Hiram Edson. He's the one that opened up the light on both of these truths. Okay, but his light in 1856 over here was not received. They had a period of time to receive it, 7 years, prophetic number. Takes you to 1863. 126 years takes you to the time of the end, just like 2520 from here takes you to the time of the end. 1888, 126 years later, is just like 677, 2520, going to 1844, the arrival of the third angel. Do you follow me?
I don't think everybody understands why 2014
I know.
marks.
I know. This was my opening remark to this group. There's a lot of background studies that need to be put in place to nail some of these things down, and you just can't do it in a day. But disregarding that, what does that tell you in terms of time setting? There has to be 7 years here to go with this 19, this 46. You guys all see this. I'm saying this chiastic structure is about what? What's it about? What's this chiastic structure about?
It's gathering.
That's involved. I mean, what prophecy? If you're going to 2520.
Yeah.
What prophecy is this about?
2520.
The 2520. 126. Okay, so it's the same subject matter. Okay, but this one ends here, right where this one's starting. There's overlap in it. You know, this one begins here in 1856.
What is
Right here.
1856 again?
1856 is the year that Hiram Edson wrote the articles on the 2520 that said, I think Miller was wrong. He should have used this 2520. And those articles were never finished, and they weren't rediscovered till 2005. And when they were rediscovered in 2005, because we didn't know any better, we taught both of them as accurate, and that's the way it's went ever since. Now, are you tired? You tired? Okay, she looks kind of tired, so I asked her. When she said no, I thought I'd move on. Okay.
I'm just getting over a cold.
Don't ask a woman if they're tired. Yes, that's probably true. Are you sad? Okay. I wasn't asking that to take more time. I realize I'm going to quit in 5 minutes.
Am I sleeping?
Pardon me?
Am I sleeping?
No, I just had to get away from asking a wife something without moving it on. Now, what I want to close with is probably, not probably, and it's going to take me more than 5 minutes. What are you doing here? Okay. What I'm wanting you to see here is this history of Millerite history. Okay. I'm going to start it over here. This is August 11th. And then October 22nd. We'll close with this, but it'll take a second. And I'm saying 1863 is a legitimate waymark for early Millerite history. But I'm saying that 1850 is. And why would 1850 be a...
You said Millerite history, you mean Advent history?
Millerite Adventism, any way you want to...
Yeah.
Yep.
1850
That's a
chart.
chart.
Okay, so this is a waymark.
Yeah.
This is when this table comes into history. I'm saying there's another well-known waymark here in 1846. I'm saying that to give you opportunity to tell me what happened in 1846. 1846,
Is it marriage?
Sabbath. Ellen and James White began keeping the Sabbath. They were married together,
Name change.
and her name was changed. Name change, Sabbath keeping, marriage, all a symbol of the covenant. What did Ellen White do in 1846? She was rebaptized. So in 1846, you got four histories saying covenant relationship. You've got Sabbath, sign of the covenant, marriage, sign of the covenant, name change, sign of the covenant, baptism, sign of the covenant. Okay, 1850 now, from here to here, this is the history that most of Adventism doesn't understand. From here to here, what's going on in Adventism? Internal work. Internal work. They're not sure why they had a mistake in 1844. They're going to spend a couple years figuring that out. And it's not until 1850 that they're going to take their message to the world. What's the teaching tool that they're going to use to take the message to the world? It's right there. Okay. What's 50 a symbol of? 1850? 50? Pentecost. Okay, so you're seeing a disappointment here, but what happens here? The third angel arrives. He has a writing in his hand, which means what? It means there's a message that you don't understand. An angel comes down, he's got a message in his hand that you have to understand. You have to eat it. So there's something they have to understand on October 22nd, 1844, and thereafter. So they begin taking up that work. The Lord's going to begin finalizing His covenant with them in this history and lead them to where they can take the message of the gospel to the world. Do they do it? No. Because in 1856, they were given opportunity for the message to be fully understood, this message. Yeah, and you're bringing in other things that can be brought in. And what happens in 1863? The light of health reform arrives. Okay, and you're probably all familiar with the quote where Sister White says, there are turning points in the history of the nations and of the church. When these different crises arrive, the light for that time is given. 1863 is the dead center of the Civil War. It's the turning point of the Civil War. And in 1863, the light for that time was health reform. And they rejected that, but they're already in rebellion back here. They're already rejecting the 2520 light of higher medicine. From the same guy that brought them the light on the 2300. Okay, so this history here, the Lord is now giving us more details to. So in closing here tonight, I want to show you something. And when you ask me afterwards, I'm going to give you the question you may think about asking me before you ask me, that I don't have an answer for. Why would anyone even think about doing that? That's the question. I'm going to show you something, you're going to say, why would anyone even consider doing that? And that's the same question I have, but it don't matter. It works. Okay, so in a prophetic year, how many days are there?
360.
360. In a 360-day prophetic year, in sanctuary terms, how many days in that year is the priest in the most holy place? How many days is he in the holy place? Holy place? Most holy place. For 1 day a year. Everyone with me?
Yes.
You're already, this is where it's going to start. You're going to say, why would you do this? Okay. You know that Sister White says that the outpouring of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost was a token that Christ had began his work as high priest in the sanctuary above. Okay, so at Pentecost in 31 AD, Jesus began his work as high priest. You follow my logic? Okay, so if you go back to 31 AD with the biblical calendar and you find when the day of Pentecost was, all right, that's the day that Jesus began work as a priest in 31 AD. And he began Pentecost in 31 AD was the 17th of June. That was Pentecost. So now, if you count every day from the 17th of June, 31 AD, you will be starting when Christ began his work in the most holy place. And if you count every day from there to October 22nd, 1844, then you will have counted how many days Christ's holy place ministry was. Yes? Okay. And how many days are there? There are 662,314 days between Pentecost in 31 AD to October 22nd, 1844. How many have already seen this presentation? Seems like Brother David may have. No? Okay, you got to follow me now. You got to follow me, but this is probably the bad one to start with, or end with, I mean. If you take this and divide it by 359, it's going to show you what each one of these prophetic days represents. And there's a little bit of remainder, but 662,314 days divided by 359 is 1,844. Okay, so a day takes you to, a day equates to 1,844. With the remainder, I'm going to deal with the remainder, so relax, I'm going to deal with the remainder. Wow. So this day here, the most holy place, its ratio would be how many days? How many days would Christ be in his most holy place ministry? 1,844 days. So if you start on October 22nd, 1844, when he began, and you go 1,844 days in the future, where do you come to? you come to 1849. November 9th, 1849. Now, if you know Selected Messages, Book 1, page 68, that's a 1, point 1 and 2. This is one of the places where Sister White says that if the Millerites had followed on by faith, they would have been in heaven before this. Ere this, she says. Okay? If they didn't, I'm not saying they did, but if they had followed on by faith, they would have went straight into heaven. But they didn't. They were in a, whatever they were, okay? Without being negative, they just didn't do it. And I want you to see that on November 9th, 1849, with this ratio, that's when 1844 days ends, on November 9th. Okay. Now, we're just getting started on this. 49, symbol of forgiveness, is it not? 7 times 70. 7 times 70. What about 490 years?
Yes.
The cutoff determined by thy people. 490, 49, and 50 we're already dealing with, a symbol of Pentecost. So notice in 1849, the work for those people that were to be the ensign that would be lifted up for the world in 1850 with their 1850 chart in November of 1849, they could have finished the work they needed to finish in order to take the gospel to the world. And where were James and Ellen White living in November of 1849? They were living in the home of the brother that puts this chart together. So they were right there in that history, ready to make this public outreach tool. They made it.
Portland?
But 400 of them?
Isn't it Portland? Maine?
Portland, Maine? Perhaps, probably. So, let me carry on, and so we can bring this to a conclusion, and then you can start challenging me. There is a remainder. Okay, I said that. Okay, so what is the remainder? I'm saying that one day in this prophetic year equates to 1,844 days. But there's a certain amount of hours and minutes and seconds. And the 21 hours, 15 minutes, and 33 seconds. Okay, so it's actually 1,844 days, 20 hours, 15 minutes, and 33 seconds. That's the remainder, okay? You follow me? Okay, so I'm saying there's also a lesson from these hours, minutes, and seconds. And the first one that I'll point out to you is that 21 hours equals, and you can check it out if you need to, 1,260 minutes. And therefore, it's identifying the days from Christ being baptized until the cross. Okay, and he needed the blood of the cross to begin his work in the sanctuary above. So this 21 hours can be understood as 1,260 minutes. There's other places you could plug the 1,260 in, but I'm saying that it's accurate to plug it in here from his baptism to the cross, because of the 15 minutes and 33 seconds are going to keep saying cross, cross, cross. The cross was Passover, was it not? Okay, the Passover in Egypt, when did it take place? I mean, it was, no, but in history. It was in BC, right? What year, BC? 1533. BC is the first Passover. if you take a day, a biblical day, and you go 21 hours, 15 minutes, and 33 seconds into that biblical day, what biblical hour do you end up at? If you take all of this together, and you have a biblical day, and you go 21 hours, 15 minutes, and 33 seconds into that day, where does it take you to? To the 9th hour. What happened at the 9th hour? He died on the 9th. He died right there at the 9th hour. And all of this is going to speak to the cross, okay? He died at the 9th hour. Mark 15:33 will tell you. Let's read it.
Wow, another level.
And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. Mark 15:23 takes you to the 9th hour, which this equates to. So the remainder to this ratio, I just don't, this is part of my apology. This is where I got in trouble with all of this stuff. To think that this could be human devising or that it would be a coincidence is,
Crazy as that.
yeah. Okay, so once you have this in place, what I'm wanting you to see is, in advance of tomorrow, and maybe we won't even deal with November 9th tomorrow perhaps, I'm wanting you to see that you can show in the structure of the beginning of Adventism where November 9th would have been the close of probation for people that were going to carry the gospel to the world in agreement with what Sister White says, that they could have been in heaven ere this had they followed on by faith. But by this time period here, she's already talking about them going into the Laodicean condition. Here they're rejecting the message of Hiram Edson, who's obviously the messenger of that history. Not to denigrate Sister White, but you follow my point. So the beginning of Adventism is illustrating the end from Adventism, and this is kind of a subtle secondary argument to what we're teaching about November 9th this year. Okay? But let me finish off something over here. This one is pretty simple, I think. 677 is what? What happened? Nope, not quite. This is Manasseh going into captivity, right?
Yeah.
When's Zedekiah going to watch his family killed and get his eyes gouged out? 607, which is 70 years later. And when do they come out of Babylon and begin the work of rebuilding? 70 years later, which is 537. You follow that?
537 they come out of Babylon.
These are all BCs. Okay, so 677. I want to make sure I get this right and don't throw you any curveballs. If you go November 9th, 1849, but you go 70 years into the future, it takes you to 1919, which is a waymark. And if you go 70 years in the future, it takes you to November 9th, 1989. Anyway, that's just getting started on some of the structures that are nailing down November 9th. I'll close with this one. When did the Pilgrims get to the United States? How many boats were the Pilgrims going to bring to the United States?
Yeah, the Santa and the Pinta,
the
yeah,
Pinta
Santa
and the
Maria,
Santa
three of them anyways.
Really? So the Pilgrims were being captained by what's his name, the Italian? Christopher Columbus was guiding the Pilgrims.
Sorry about
And this, we're learning this in Virginia, which is one of the birthplaces of the United States. 1620. There was supposed to be 2 ships, but the one ship couldn't make it. And if you track that ship, it's clearly prophetic. It's clearly prophetic. The ship gets repaired because they leave from Holland. They go to England. The second ship is leaking on the way to England. In England, they repair the ship again. It's still leaking. So the Pilgrims come here on one ship. The next year, the second ship arrives. When do the Pilgrims first see land?
November.
Why are they desperate to find land?
Beer.
Okay, we already know that. Beer. They're looking for beer. They got to have beer. Yes, and you don't travel the oceans in that day and age without beer. You don't travel anywhere without beer because water is unsafe to drink in that time period, and you have to have a water that has been partially cleansed by fermentation. And by the time they get close to the glorious land, they're out of any kind of vegetable matter to make beer, and they're desperate to make beer, so they're heading in to look for land desperately. The only reason I'm making this point is this nation begins in 1620. The glorious land is first seen on November 9th, 1620. And the end of the United States, the end of the glorious land over here, is at the Sunday Law. And it's because, not of beer, but of wine, the wine of Babylon. So in both cases, you've got alcohol. When is it that they land, what, on the 11th? They see land for the first time on November 9th, but I think they arrive on the 11th. But the second ship, it comes in 1621. When does it arrive? November 9th. Okay, they see it here. Second ship arrives here. When you get to 1989, what happens on November 9th? The Berlin Wall comes down, and that has always been what we marked as the fulfillment of verse 40. Because we were going to teach 3 walls. The Berlin Wall, the wall of separation of church and state, and verse 42, Egypt, the wall of national sovereignty. So as we come down to this history, we're going to see some other November 9ths as we proceed. November 9th pops up often in the history of the United States. And if you, and I realize that someone told me in here, and I'll end with this, that for me to make the claim that the third angel arrives in 2014 takes some study to teach that. But you can see it, it's airtight, okay, if you take the time to work through all the process. And one of the things that you would work through is the symbolism of October 22nd, 1844. October 22nd, 1844, October 22nd is the symbol of the Sunday Law. It's easy for you, if you've been in this message, to follow my logic. Maybe some of you that haven't been in the message can't follow it, but it's really easy. The disappointment that followed the cross, Sister White uses to illustrate the disappointment of October 23rd, 1844. Also the disappointment by the Red Sea. Okay, so the beginning of Adventism, the door closes in the parable of the 10 virgins on October 22nd, 1844. That's the arrival of the disappointment, and that disappointment follows the cross. Therefore, October 22nd, 1844 is the cross. But that history, that disappointment is pointing forward to the point where the door closes on us at the end of the world. And where's that? The Sunday Law. The Sunday Law is the cross. The Sunday Law is the cross. And the Sunday Law is where the third angel arrives. But October 22nd, as a date, can be a symbol of the Sunday law. Okay? So if you just take that prophetic premise and you go to, let's say, 2014, and we're saying the third angel arrives in 2014, therefore there is symbolically some kind of Sunday law that had to arrive, right? Because the third angel is a message about the Sunday law, right? So if in 2014 there were a Sunday law, the day of the year in 2014 that symbolizes the Sunday law is what? October 22nd. And I'm not saying I know of anything that happened on October 22nd. I'm saying that if we're teaching the third angel arrives in 2014, and we know the third angel arrived in 1844, therefore the third angel arriving here would bring the characteristics of October 22nd, 1844 to here. But down here in our history, it's a Sunday law. So if we were to take the symbol of the Sunday law, October 22nd, and plug it in with 2014, what it would do is demonstrate this same phenomena that I think I've erased. This one. From October 22nd, 2014 to 2019, November 9th, is 1,844 days. Anyway. Now, the question that should be on your mind, why would anyone pursue this? What's some mind working on that they actually trace those things
No,
down?
it is not.
Yeah, why?
He loves numbers.
He loves numbers, okay, all right.
Stephen came up with that.
In Ireland.
Theodore in Ireland.
Yeah, well, Theodore worked on it after Stephen, and Stephen's still working on it. Theodore may as well, but that
It was mostly Stephen.
Stephen's the one that.
Beautiful.
It's scary. It's scary.
Every detail is in his hands. Every detail
Come
of
on.
history is in God's hands.
It's his story.
His story, yes, amen.
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the Sabbath. We thank you for bringing us here safely. We know that travel currently, the past few days in the United States and the following days might be rough for some, but we've made it here. We thank you for that. We ask a double blessing because these are the Sabbath hours, but also because we're living in the time of the latter rain, and we ask that you would pour your latter rain out upon us. We ask that you give us a good night's rest tonight, that we might be fully refreshed tomorrow, and that we might pursue some of these concepts about time setting, baptism, November 9th, hard subjects that we're going to need much of your grace, much of your Spirit to internalize. We ask that you bless us with an outpouring that we can do that very thing in Jesus' name. Amen.